90% or more of all restaurants lease their space. There's so many challenges to that because we're not experts at leases and lease negotiation and getting concessions and getting the absolute best deal for our restaurant versus the landlord. Well, that's why we're bringing back one of our most popular episodes. Dale Willerton is the Lease Coach. He is a leasing expert, and he knows all the ins and outs, and he can help you not only negotiate a renewal, negotiate a new lease, negotiate the best concessions for your business, but also lower your rent. He's amazing at what he does, and I don't know anyone else that's got the expertise of Dale. And again, we brought him back because he is one of our most popular episodes, and I know that if you listen to this episode, it can benefit you. So stay tuned. If you like what you're hearing, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite podcast player so other hospitality professionals can find us. And if you have a topic that we haven't covered that you'd like us to, please drop me a line, Roger, R-O-G-E-R, at restaurantrockstars.com. Now, on with the episode.
You're tuned in to the Restaurant Rockstars podcast. Powerful ideas to rock your restaurant. Here's your host, Roger Bodwin.
Listen, what would it feel like to lower your operating costs, double your sales, lower staff turnover, create raving fans, and design a menu that literally prints money? Our online restaurant training system will teach you and your staff to rock your restaurant and transform your business. Head on over to restaurantrockstars.com. It'll take you less than 5 minutes to get started. You've got this. This is the Restaurant Rockstars podcast. So glad you're here. And Dale, you're the lease coach and a leasing guru. Welcome back on the show. We had you on, I think it was about 2 years ago, but you had so much to offer our audience. We just had to bring you back.
Roger, I'm so glad to be back with you. You have such a great platform and so much great information. Restaurant owners need all the help they can get, so I'm glad to be back.
Let's start by saying landlords negotiate leases for a living, and they own property. It's like they do this all the time. And tenants, not so much. Maybe this is their first time. Maybe they've done it before, but they're certainly not experts. How can this whole situation be a win-win for both a landlord and a lessee?
A couple of months ago, I was speaking at the World Tea Expo in Las Vegas. Big event, 500 vendors and exhibitors, 15,000 people. And they wanted to put on a course that was great for people starting up a new tea shop, restaurant, there's coffee business. And they asked about 5 of us to come in and do a presentation. So I did my 1-hour presentation, but at the end of the day, we all had to come back for Q&A. After the audience all asked their Q&A questions, the commentator said, I've got one sort of final question for each of you. And he said to me, he said, Dale, share a circumstance with us where you've negotiated a great win-win deal for landlord and tenant.
Yes.
And I said, that's a loaded question because I said, I don't negotiate win-win. I work for the tenant. I'm looking after the tenant. If I can get the tenant 12 months of free rent, a $200,000 tenant allowance, all kinds of inducements and a good rental rate, if I can get all of that for the tenant, I'm not worried about the landlord. They'll look after themselves. And Roger, here is what made that question and answer resonate. Everyone in the room applauded that answer because they wanted to win. It wasn't about win-win negotiating.
I'm really glad you clarified that because I think that puts our audience in the driver's seat more than the landlord. And I think they would appreciate that as much as your last client. So thank you so much for clarifying that.
Okay.
Let's talk about, now you specialize in tenant services and you've got a value-added package that includes so much to go to bat for tenants versus landlords. Can you tell us about that package and what that includes and how you work with lessees? Or someone starting for the very first time with a brand new restaurant and they need to lease a space.
And different tenants come to us with different situations. A lot of them are startups. They're opening up a brand new restaurant or type of business, and we've got to take them from scratch. That can be site selection, negotiation, document review. Of course, we do all of that. But many of them, Roger, come to us for their lease renewal. Okay, there's 2 million lease renewals in America every year. And that approach is a little bit different because they're already an existing tenant to the landlord. So we have 3 basic services we're offering: a coaching package where we will coach you, mentor you, review all your documents, stop you from making costly mistakes. And nobody even knows you got our help. They just think you got really smart really fast. Okay. Secondly, you can turn the negotiating process over to me and I'll negotiate your lease renewal, or I'll negotiate your new lease with your new landlord and their broker. Or site selection. I've gone as far as Hawaii to do site selection. I was just in Los Angeles doing site selection for a client. And basically, we're looking for the right property at the right price that the tenant can afford. So those are our three main services. And what makes us unique in the marketplace is we only and exclusively work for the tenant. There's no double dipping. We're not trying to get paid by the landlord as well. So when I say to my client, that's not such a great location, or that's too many square feet for you, I'm usually the only one saying that, but they can take it to the bank because it'll be the truth. That's what we do for tenants.
Fantastic. Well, that's quite a library of services. Let's talk about site selection because that's critical. We've all heard that old adage, location, location. My very first lease was in a terrible location, but I somehow made it work. How do you evaluate different spaces and what are the keys to that? And I've got some follow-up questions because that's a pretty deep topic unto itself. But let's start with the basics. What should you look for in a space?
Of course, it varies from tenant to tenant, but the right size is critical. Most landlords are going to charge you per square foot. And if you only need 2,000 square feet and you're leasing 2,600, like I say, Michael, why do you have 2,600 square feet? You don't need, that's the only unit that was left. That was the only size. Maybe you should have walked away, right? Don't drive around town in a bus if you can get around in a minivan or a car, right? So really, site selection has to be the right property, the right fit. One of my biggest franchise clients is UPS Courier. And I noticed that a lot of UPS Courier franchisees are in good plazas. Their UPS stores are in good plazas, but they're often with poor exposure. They're on an angle, not perpendicular to the road and not parallel. And so that's not so good either. You need that street visibility. Roger, I was driving yesterday on my way back from a root canal. I was driving past this on this road that had, I was thinking of this, 60 or 70,000 cars a day. And a new business had opened up just maybe 100 yards away. But their signage was so small from the road, I couldn't read who they were.
Poor visibility.
That's right. So are you going to get good visibility? Are you going to get good signage? You have signage if you're not visible at the road, will you be visible on a pylon sign down at the end? That type of thing. And the parking, all of those things play into it. There's 5 different types of landlords, and there's 5 different reasons they own property. There's developers. I used to work for developers. I've got a big background. I used to work for landlords, shopping mall manager. And one of my employers at that time, they specialized in they'd buy a piece of land, they'd design a plaza, they would fill it with tenants, then they'd flip it for a profit. Nothing wrong with that, but that's a true developer. Then you've got insurance companies that own investment property. You've got real estate investment trusts. You've got mom and pop landlords. They all have different motivations. And some of them may or may not want your use. When I used to do leasing for landlords, we had a wish list of all the types of industries we wanted. And if we wanted a coffee shop instead of a dentist, then we might try to charge the dentist more money because we don't really care whether he comes in or not. So if he's willing to pay extra, we'll let you into the plaza, but we're trying to get a coffee shop. Okay. There's a lot of dynamics in there.
Oh, I see that.
But let me be a little more direct. We use CoStar. CoStar is the #1 multiple listing service in America for commercial space. It's not free. We pay a premium to have that service. So we can see everything that's available for lease. But then the key is the flying to the location and doing the drive around. I had a call from a franchisor and he said, Dale, we got 300 locations. We're opening more. How do you get such good sites I want advice. How do you get such good sites for your clients? And I said, I fly there. I look at the locations. I don't do it on my computer. I don't do it based on what a broker tells me, right? He said, oh, we don't have the budget to fly there and actually inspect the space before the franchisee signs the lease. And I said, well, they're going to pick a lot of dog locations. And it's going to be the franchisor's fault because they never made the effort. They were taking someone else's word that it was a good location. And tenants can often be hoodwinked into thinking it's a good location when really it's not because they're not being shown everything in the marketplace. So it's online research, boots on the ground, Roger. Nothing sophisticated. You've got to go there.
That sounds like an investment to me and not a cost, Dale. It's like it can be
I agree.
Penny smart and pound foolish, the old adage there too. So that begs the question. There's so many different parameters. How many spaces would you recommend looking at before somebody settles on something? Let's just say someone hires you to work with them, and is it 3 spaces, 4 or 5 spaces? And so many parameters fall into that, like traffic counts, perhaps, visibility from the road you talked about,
Of course.
complementary tenants that have high traffic that might bring business to your space, like all these things I'm thinking of. And I'm sure there's more.
That's right. And typically it's over 10. So between 10 and 20 properties will make the initial list.
Okay, more than
And
I
then
thought.
and then we begin to shortlist them based on finding, oh, it's 4,000 square feet and we only need 3,000. Sometimes that information isn't right there in your face. And sometimes there's columns. In New York, we have a lot of problems where restaurant space, the building is not vented.
That's a huge, of course.
You can't put food service in there, right?
Yep.
Those are all the things we find out. And the list is going down and down. And then typically we'll negotiate on 3 to 5. So I like to have 3 lease proposals in play. Okay, 3, not 1. Just because you're in love with one location, you need at least 2 more decoy locations.
But it's also leverage, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what you want. But if you're using the same broker on all 3 locations, that's not going to work out that well for you. Ideally, the tenant is negotiating directly with the listing agent or directly with the landlord. If you're using a broker, they're not going to want to rate 3 offers. They're not going to want to rate 3 proposals because they're only getting paid for 1 deal, or 1 commission. And they don't want to make the other landlords mad because the landlords might not do a deal with them next time. There's a bit of a greasy underworld here.
Do you ever recommend restaurants go into a location that has lots of restaurant competition nearby? In the auto industry world, you'll have auto miles and strips where there's 10 different car dealerships because business brings more business. Does that always work for restaurants? Do you want to be at a place that's a big restaurant destination? Or would you prefer a standalone? Does it vary?
We talked about this in our last podcast, and one of the points I made was that if there's too many food service businesses, parking can become an issue. Parking's at a premium because they're all coming at the same time. I do think that depending on your industry, positioning yourself right beside your competitors can be very good. Now, here's my point though. A well-known tenant doesn't position themselves beside unknown tenants. It's the other way around. The more mom and pop you are, the more local, the more one-off you are, you want to be beside all the big boys. Okay. So they're not gravitating towards you. Like I've got a client out of California that said, we want to be within 500 yards of a McDonald's. It's that simple.
All right. Let's talk about, what about concessions? You mentioned that when we first got on the show, 12 months. Is that unheard of today or is that realistic?
I've got to break that down for you. And in my book, I explain this. Now, everybody should remember they're going to get a free copy of this book just by going to the leasecoach.com and signing up for it. Okay?
That's fantastic.
330 pages. Now, 12 months of free rent you're talking about. The most free rent I ever got for a tenant, Roger, it was a 10-year lease and I got him the first 4 years free. I'll never do that again. Grand slam home run. Never do that again. Now, I had this one franchise client. I got him 12 months of free rent. And he said, how could you possibly get me 12 months of free rent? I said, I asked for 18. So it's all about how you negotiate on the deal. He would have been satisfied with 3 months of free rent, and that's all he would have gotten, right? But concessions can be, in my book, here's the point I wanted to make. In my book, I explained that people misunderstand free rent. The landlord and the landlord's broker will represent free rent to you from the time you sign the lease forward. Free rent in my book is explained as from the time your doors open forward.
Much better.
Yes. The period of time it takes to fixture and design and permit
Fit up,
and build up. Yeah, and fit up can easily take 12 months. I just did one on the East Coast. I got them 14 months of fixturing period. And then all the free rent came in front of that. So it depends on what you're calling free rent, because my philosophy is there should be no rent payable before the tenant opens their doors for business. 50% of restaurants in America pay rent, Roger, before their doors open because no one took them through the lease and explained these fixed dates are going to come back to bite you. I've got a restaurant client opening in a couple of months in Chicago. Negotiated a really big window for him to do all of his design and build out. Before he could start, Roger, the landlord had to do a certain amount of landlord's work. The landlord had to get the building up to snuff, and then he was going to take over and do his work. The landlord said they'd have it done in 2 or 3 weeks. It was more like 2 or 3 months. 2 or 3 months. So you've got to be careful that if it says 30 days from now, 60 days from now, 90 days from now, these things will happen. That's okay because they're joined. But don't say you get 3 months and then this happens for 2 months and then that happens for 2 months with dates, because the dates are going to get missed. I've owned one restaurant. My HVAC system for my restaurant came in a week late. I was a week late opening. All the other tenants had opened. There was a big grand opening. And I was delayed. It took them a full day to put it in. And then the next day we were ready to open. Everything was ready. The food was in the fridges. We just had no air conditioning. That during the pandemic, that could have been a 3-month or 6-month wait.
Absolutely true. Wow, that's a golden nugget of information right there. I think the average person going into a lease for the first time thinks, oh, I'm getting a deal, 3 months of free rent, and then it's going to take them 3 months to open the doors while they're burning through cash fitting up the space while they're paying rent. Right. And working capital is king, especially in a restaurant startup. So that was an excellent point. What is a profitable lease agreement?
A profitable lease agreement. I haven't heard that phrase before. The business can be profitable.
I thought that was a term in your book. Maybe it's my mistake.
Well, it could just be a lease agreement that allows you to be like, if in the restaurant industry, Roger, I think that the average is about, they say if you're doing $1 million a year.
Yes, I think you're on the right track.
You can afford about 10% of your growth. 10% of your gross revenue can go to your gross rent, right? So if you're doing $1 million out of your restaurant, you can afford about $100,000 on your rent. If you're paying 14 or 18% of your gross in rent, you're not going to be profitable. So I was talking to a client recently, very sharp guy at many locations. He said, we're at 7.5% occupancy cost, but we think we can get it down to 6 with your help. Okay.
That's a really interesting point, because our industry is centered around what we call prime cost, right? Which is the sum total of your food, beverage, and labor costs. And the benchmark there, if you have a prayer of making money, it's somewhere between 50 to 55%, which means for every dollar of sales, 50 to 55 cents goes to your food, beverage, and labor. And then you got your lease expense. And if that's 10%, now you're suddenly at 65%. And now you got 35 cents left over from every dollar to pay every other expense in the place. And we know it's a long list of expenses. So I'm really glad that you provided that benchmark. Let's talk about, do you recommend, let's just say you're a first-time tenant going in, got a brand new restaurant. Do you recommend having a shorter term lease with an option to renew in case things don't work out?
No, the more money you spend building out your restaurant, the longer you want the term to be. Part of that is just because if you're going in for financing, if you want a 10-year loan from the bank, then you need a 10-year lease. They're only going to give you a loan for the initial term of your lease in most cases. So if you say, I'm signing a 5-year lease, they say, we're only going to give you a 5-year loan. We can't afford that. Plus everything's supposed to last 10 years. But the more you spend, usually the longer the lease. What I do is I approach it from the back end and I build in an early right of termination. So yeah, we'll sign a 10-year lease or even a 12-year lease. If I can get 2 years of free rent, we'll sign a 12-year lease and pay rent for 10, which is what they want. And the option to get out early is often attached to something like missing sales marks. If we don't get to $1 million in gross sales by year 3, we can give 6 months notice and terminate our lease and walk away without penalty. We tried. Why nail us? It depends how you're getting the space. If the space, I often talk about this at my seminars. So I speak at the California, Florida, New York restaurant shows for 15 years. The California show is coming up right away. I will see you there.
See you at the Los Angeles show. Yeah, it's actually not on Orange County, but yeah, it's coming up quick.
And it's so interesting to talk to these tenants about their situations and what they go through in their lease deals. But I'll pause there.
Is there any overlap with a sublet clause with the early termination in case things don't work out? You don't want to get sued. You don't want to go to court. If you can find a suitable tenant that the landlord approves, is that a separate thing, or do you see that much in every lease?
At the Lease Coach, we've done, in the past 25 plus years, we've done probably close to 4,000 leases, maybe a quarter of them for restaurants, okay? Because we work in all different industries and that type of thing. And the termination, I'm sorry, Roger, can you just repeat that?
Yeah, I wanted to know if there was, besides the early termination clause that you talked about, is there any overlap with a sublet? Yeah.
Or assignment. Thank you.
Exactly, the assignment.
Assignments are the way to go. Very few restaurants owners will ever sublet their space. And if you're talking about the owner giving up his space for another restaurant owner, right? Not the landlord. I'm
talking about the lessee having a way out in case things don't work out. Right. Business just fails, but you got a 5 or a 10-year lease and you don't want to be sued be on the hook for it.
The way it's supposed to work is if I sublease my space to you, then you're supposed to pay your money to me and then I pay it to the landlord.
Oh, I see.
In a lease assignment, the landlord signs off on it and you pay your rent directly to the landlord. So lease assignments are the norm, not subletting.
I see.
Just to be clear.
Much better.
You're still on the hook though, Roger. So if the person like I'm this one restaurant franchisee come to me and they had sold their two franchise restaurants, and they had done an assignment of the lease because the seller was still on the hook for the lease. And because the buyer of the restaurants was defaulting, the landlord forced the sellers, the original tenant, to pay the rent. They kicked out the tenant, pay the rent, but they couldn't get back in the space, Roger. They were obligated to pay the rent, but they did not have the right to go back in and reopen a restaurant. So assignments are really a critical part of the entire lease deal that we negotiate.
Are there any advantages to a landlord or a way out if suddenly he decides to terminate the lease early, or is that has to be in a clause and you negotiate that away? And I tell you why I ask that is I've seen multiple situations where a restaurant will build a really strong business in a space, and then all of a sudden the landlord decides there's a higher and better use. I'm going to tear the building down and build condos, and you're out. And sometimes that might happen in a timing situation where the lease isn't even up to renewal and the contract's not over, but yet I'm the poor restaurant owner who doesn't have the money to bring you to court and sue you because this will drag out for years and cost me a ton of money, but suddenly I lost my business. Do you see these things happening?
Very rare, very rare. Landlords want tenants. The longest formal lease agreement, Roger, can be 40, 50, 60 pages long. And the biggest clause in the formal lease agreement is the default clause. So if you don't pay your rent and if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, of course they can boot you out, right? They can sue you and evict you from the space. But it's really quite rare that the landlord is going to say, everybody move out because we're going to build condos here. It happens once in a while, but it's not something you would actually worry about. If you get sent a lease agreement and there is a clause that says, in the event we decide to redevelop the property, we can give you 1 year's notice and you have to move out, which is a rare clause to see in a lease. That means that's at least in their target. Yeah. It's at least in their sights. But most leases don't have that redevelopment clause. They really don't, because the buildings may be only 15 years old or 20 years old. They're not going to tear that down. Older buildings are more susceptible to that.
Okay. Thanks for answering that. Not every landlord is above board. What type of pitfalls do you see in leases? Beware the fine print kind of stuff. And that must come up from time to time.
It's what the tenant doesn't understand. I explain to my client when I do it, we talked about my services at the Lease Coach, but I also do a fantastic 39-point lease inspection for my clients. I do the full document review. I don't really think they need an attorney. They can use one if they want, but I'm going to go through it like an industry insider. And the clauses in the lease agreement are very apparent to me. And I spend a lot of time explaining to my clients that this is what this clause means. Your staff cannot park on the parking lot. What do you mean my staff can't park on the parking lot? We're going to have to negotiate that because there's not enough parking and they don't want your staff on the parking lot. They're not going to come to work if there's no place to park because the tenant sees a heading that says parking, but they don't really gloss over it. So there's a lot in a lease agreement every lease agreement is loaded in the landlord's favor, right? So I'm holding my arm up like this. You can't see it. Let's say this way. The lease is leaning towards the landlord. When I take on I say, look, I'm not going to get the lease agreement to lean over here towards you. I'm just going to get it to the middle. I'm going to make sure that it's fair and reasonable within industry standards.
Do you have more to add to that?
It's just the document review process for me, because I'm a lease nerd, is so much fun. I love going through it. What do you mean?
Word to word.
I did one recently where it said, this was for a restaurant. It said if the restaurant owner, the tenant, sold the restaurant, they had to give 10% of whatever they sold the restaurant for to the landlord.
No kidding.
That's not normal in the industry. And of course, that's not advisable. But of course, what did my client say? When I explained that to him, he said, is it like, I said, this is what the clause says. Then I wait for their reaction. He said, well, it's normal. No, that's not normal.
That brings up a situation that I'm working with a client right now, and they want to start their very first restaurant. They've had success doing some pop-ups in different locations, but now they want a bricks and mortar space. And hey, come look at this space. What do you think, kind of thing. And the odd thing is they've showed me two places where the landlord expects them to pay a portion of his property tax in addition to CAM, in addition to the rent. Is that typical today, or is that completely unusual? Your restaurant team is the foundation of your business and most important asset. I know from experience that a happy team is a productive team that deliver great guest service experiences. Morale is the key. Check out myemployees.com/hospitality. My Employees offers impactful, consistent, and most of all, appreciated recognition programs that boost morale, reduce turnover, and drive guest satisfaction. My Employees is the industry benchmark, helping thousands of hospitality leaders build winning teams. Go to myemployees.com/hospitality. Lily's Fresh Pasta refuses to compromise on quality. This family-owned business, built on time-honored traditions passed down from Lily to her son Antonio, lives on with every batch. Lily's Fresh Pasta is made to European standards using 100% non-GMO, glyphosate-free Italian unbleached wheat. Lily's is served in the finest restaurants in America. I've had Lily's Fresh Pasta many times, and I can tell you it's always molto buono. Elevate your menu. Serve Lily's Fresh Pasta in your restaurant. Ask your local food service representative or call Antonio directly at 603-818-2100. And be sure to follow Lily's on Instagram at Lily's Fresh Pasta.
It is. I was speaking at Coffee Fest in Portland just last week, and I explained at the very beginning of my seminars and my presentations now, Roger, I explained there's two types of leases. There's a triple net lease and there's a gross lease. 95% of leases are triple net and 5% are gross. You don't want a gross lease. There's bad things about a gross lease agreement. So 95% of tenants in America are on some form of triple net lease. And that means if you occupy 12% of the plaza or 4% of the mall or 3% of the office building, then you're going to pay that same percentage in property taxes, maintenance, management, all of those costs. That's normal. Okay. So so you're paying a base rent, which is fixed. Let's say it's $20 per square foot. But then you might be paying $5.47 per square foot for common area maintenance fees, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, all those things that go on. Okay, so that's normal.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah.
And the triple net is not usually negotiable. Okay. It is what it is. The landlord's trying to recoup 100% of what they spend on the building. And the reason that this formula exists is because triple net charges always go up, right? The trash removal next year is going to be more expensive than trash removal this year. Insurance is sure as heck going to be more expensive next year than it is this year. So the landlord wants to be able to keep raising those triple net charges, called the CAM, common area maintenance, to keep up with inflation.
Sure. Wow, that eliminates a landlord's downside. Now, I haven't leased a property in over 30 years, so that certainly wasn't the case back then in my situation, but apparently you just explained it. Thanks for clarifying. Now, when you travel to different locations across the country, you've been doing this for so long, I'm sure you got a very strong gut feel about certain spaces based on what this client wants to achieve in their space. But we talked about downtown locations that have no parking, but they've got neighborhood walk-through traffic. We talked about shopping centers with lots of parking. We talked about, there's so many different parameters. It's like, what's the best way to advise someone? Is it a higher rent for a better location, or what's the sweet spot?
There's not one answer there. I think it's really unfortunate that because of the pandemic, the downtowns across America have been decimated. Most of them have not come back. One of my clients in California, he had 11 locations in downtown San Francisco gone because of the pandemic, downtown.
Of course.
I think downtown's still a little bit risky. If you're trying to do 9 to 5 business for the office buildings downtown, that can be nice. You got your weekends off. But if you're relying on the people who come downtown on the evenings and the weekends for entertainment downtown, it's a whole different marketplace. I believe you get what you pay for in most cases, and paying more is going to get you a better location. It's going to get you possibly more foot exposure, more visibility. So I don't mind paying more for a location. I think you're getting more.
And do the clients say, if you were me, would you do this? And then you say, yep, I absolutely would go for this, even though it's more money. I just got to feel that you're going to do much better in this space than you would in that space. It's very subjective, yet they're relying on your expertise and your long history of doing this.
As a consultant and confidant to the tenant,
yes,
as their lease coach, I don't wait for them to tell me. I tell them, you're not going here. We saw the space. I know your wife likes it. I know it's close to some of the other properties you want to. I said, this landlord's nasty. This rental rate's way out of range. There's all kinds of problems inside the building. You're not going here. I tell them. Now, they can override me. I work for the tenant. They can say, Dale, make a deal there anyway. I'll do that. I actually have to sometimes, Roger, write a letter to my tenant. I have to memorialize it and saying, I want to be clear. You've told me you want to go ahead with this location. I want to be clear. I have told you not to for these reasons. So 3 years from now, when you can't pay your rent and you call me for help again, I'm going to charge you again because you never should have gone there in the first place. So yeah, I tell them.
All right. Thank you for that. You specialize in rent reductions. We briefly touched on that throughout this. Let's talk about that. When and how to go to work with the reduction.
If a tenant has a renewal option clause in their lease agreement, the first thought is, let's just exercise the renewal option clause because the rent increase, already annual rent increases preset. And I say, no, I don't recommend doing that. Let's do our market research first. Let's talk to the landlord. For all we know, we can actually get a rent reduction. Now, Roger, sometimes getting a rent reduction isn't the only thing we're getting. When I approach a lease renewal, I try to make the landlord re-earn that tenancy, right? So I say, if my client moved out, you'd probably have to give free rent and tenant allowance to the next tenant, wouldn't you? You'd probably have to pay a commission on that, wouldn't you, to your broker? Yes. I said, look, you don't have all those costs if he stays. But if I take him somewhere else, so you'd be better off just giving us the rent reduction and giving us some free rent so we can remodel and giving us tenant allowance, that type of thing. So I negotiate a lease renewal as if I'm negotiating a brand new lease for the first time. I want those same inducement packages. And I want to tell you this short story. This was Firehouse Subs. I did the real estate training for Firehouse Subs a while ago in Orlando, and I was working with this one Firehouse Subs franchisee. And when a landlord puts out a package, here's our proposed lease deal. Often it includes some tenant allowance built in, okay? Tenant allowance is money that the landlord pays the tenant to induce them to sign the lease to offset their build-out costs, and it doesn't have to be repaid. One of the landlords I used to work for, and many landlords across America, will actually give a greater tenant allowance if you're willing to pay a greater rent, because they're going to recoup it. The landlord's focused on what's my net effective return. If I give you more, but you pay more, it'll all wash out in the end. That's what this Firehouse Subs franchisee did 10 years ago. He took a monster tenant allowance and agreed to pay a monster rent. Then he comes to me, he says, my lease is coming up for renewal in 6 months, and they want to increase even that by 12%. And I'm going, hold on here. They can't hold all that repaid tenant allowance against you. And I got him a $4,000 a month rent reduction. $4,000 a month, Roger. Because he didn't know, should I keep paying rent from where my rent finishes, or do we reset the dial? And I said, we got to reset the dial. They're not renting that vacant space for what they're asking you to pay. They're artificially saying, if you're paying this today, of course you have to pay that tomorrow. Next year you have to pay that. No, there's no law that says rents always have to go up. 80% of the time, I'm able to get a tenant a rent reduction. Sometimes it's okay. This one client, he's from Portland too. And he phoned me up. He's opening up a second location. He said, Dale, you might remember me. I'm the food service business in Portland. You got me a $450 a month rent reduction on my lease renewal last time. I said, oh yeah, I remember. But he was a small store. $450 to him was like $3,000 to some of these other guys.
Yeah, for sure.
And with some restaurants, Roger, it's renegotiating the percentage rent. I've got some very successful restaurant clients. Half of my clients are in the franchise industry and half are independent. And I've got some very successful larger restaurants, like 4, 5, 6, 7,000 square feet. They're doing big numbers. And my focus is going in and renegotiating their percentage rent because their base rent isn't too bad, but they're doing so well that they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars extra in percentage rent. And that's what we don't want to do. I do that all over the country. So if you got a really successful restaurant and you're paying percentage rent, that's the point you want to hit on the negotiations. I don't care because it's all a mathematical calculation, Roger. It's a balancing act.
An expert in their corner. You can't argue with that. What's the state of vacancies in different parts of the country? The pandemic wiped out, 100,000 restaurants, the statistics said supposedly, and here suddenly lots of spaces that used to be restaurants. Some of them had fixtures like range hoods and walk-ins and all that kind of stuff, saved a new tenant money. Is all that space been filled, or is the vacancy rate varying depending on where you are geographically?
Because so many restaurants are not doing that well, that space is coming on the market all the time.
Turnover.
Everywhere, turnover. And here's what's happening in realistic. Like, I'll get a call from a restaurant client and he'll say, look, I'm losing $10,000 a month and I'm paying, my rent is $10,000 a month. I said, look, if I got you a $10,000 a month rent reduction, you'd only be breaking even. They said, you're not going to be able to sell this restaurant. I said, why are you hiring me to negotiate your lease renewal? I'm not ready to throw in the towel yet. that's a scenario that plays out. But my advice to him is, look, walk away take your losses and walk away. Don't sign a 5-year lease renewal and then lose $10,000 a month for the next 60 months. So there's a lot of that second generation restaurant space coming on the market. About 50 to 60% of restaurants, new startup restaurants, will open in second generation restaurant space. And I go through this about 5 times a year. Here's what I go through. So the picture you painted is, it's a former restaurant. It's got a hood. It's maybe got a dishwasher over there. It's got a bar. It's got all these, it's got the grease trap. It's got all these things in it, right? Maybe walk-in coolers, things like that were left behind. The landlord says, you can use our equipment. I say, no, we're going to buy it for $1. If we sign this lease, here's an extra $1. We now own this equipment. That's really critical. And if the one recently that I had, I explained to him, it was a Mexican restaurant. And at the last page of his lease agreement was all the equipment. They listed all the equipment that was in the space, right? And he said, I had to replace a lot of it over the years. He said, the dishwasher broke down. I threw it away. I put in a new one. This broke down. I put in a new piece of equipment. I said, what did you do with it? That all belongs to the landlord. It says right here, that's the landlord's equipment. Oh, so we went out and bought for $10. We bought all the equipment as part of our lease renewal. Okay. There's a little more to it than just the rent.
That's really smart. This brings me back 30 years ago. My very first restaurant was in a lease space that was 4 failed restaurants before I got there. And it had the range hood, and it had some furniture, tables and chairs. It had a walk-in cooler. It had the grease trap. It saved me a lot of money. But then I spent $15,000 on something that was key to my concept, a wood-burning brick oven that was literally right in the middle of the dining room floor. And I couldn't take that with me. And I was afraid once I left that space that someone else would come in and compete directly against me when I opened a bigger restaurant a couple of miles away. But to this day, 30 years later, there's still a Chinese restaurant in that spot. And all they did was drywall around the oven, and it's still there.
Wow,
you know what I mean?
Incredible.
Isn't it?
Yes, that's incredible. And you know what that speaks to? In certain places, certain cuisines will do much better than other places.
Yeah.
A failed pizza place down the street from me here, it was on its second or third owner. And finally, it turned into a different cuisine, and now they seem to be thriving. So different cuisines.
Yeah, we had a difficult landlord. Here's a comparison. I'm shopping spaces 30 years ago. There's this wrong side of the railroad track, leaky roof, limited parking, place that had 4 failed restaurants before I got there. And then there's a brand new real estate development literally across the street that's going to be a pedestrian mall with anchor tenants and a movie theater and a hotel anchor at the end of the street. And here's this raw space that I would have to spend a lot of money to fit up. There's no electrical in there yet. There's no plumbing, and it's here. You want it, you got to do all this stuff. And there was that, okay, what's going to do better? This dumpy space on the wrong side of the tracks, or this new pedestrian mall with the hotel and the movie theater right next door? And these are the decisions you have to make. And we couldn't afford to go into that space, but thankfully we went into the dumpy space because that development never took off. They built the movie theater, but the rest of the project was a bust. No anchor tenants, no hotel, none of that ever happened. So these things, you can't see around corners, but it certainly helps to have your expertise when you can't see around corners yourself.
And there's more. You told that so eloquently. Really, the listeners need to understand. And I try to explain this to them, Roger, this big planned new development. What if it doesn't happen? What if they only get half the tenants? That happens. And most lease agreements, Roger, will have, if you're signing for a new development, like it's a pre-lease deal, it will actually not let you get off the hook as long as they haven't thrown in the towel. We're not going to build this year. We're going to build next year. Oh, we're not going to build next year. We're going to build the year after that when the economy's better. And you're on the hook. You can't get out of that lease because you never put in a right to terminate if they never move forward. So
sometimes in life, we can't see what we're going to get until we actually get it, right? You go and you do your due diligence and your best homework or whatever it is, and then you're in this space for a couple of weeks, and then suddenly the tenant next door is noisy, or there's certain odors coming from the property, and you got an indifferent landlord. What do you do when it becomes one of these situations where you just can't live with the tenant yet? You just locked yourself into 10 years living next to this tenant.
That's right. One of the things that I always ask when I'm negotiating a lease, is this property, I know, and of course it's landlord owned, but is this property landlord managed? And sometimes they say, no, we use a third-party fee property management company. Well, you're not going to get nearly the service from them if they're in Chicago and your landlord's in Florida and the property's in San Diego. So try to find out if the landlord manages their own properties.
Right.
'Cause that's better. You want that. you're at least one step closer to someone that can help you if there's a problem.
That's fantastic. Dale, we've covered a lot of ground today, and you've been super helpful talking to lease negotiation and going to bat for people and rent reductions and all the things that you can save when you invest in your business versus try to tackle it yourself if you're not an expert. So I appreciate you being on the show.
Well, you're welcome. And something I thought maybe we would share at the top of the show, but I love the flow that you took here that I want to mention.
Please.
In the commercial real estate industry, not that much changes. The leasing process is pretty much the same. It's brokers and agents and landlords and tenants. The leases are more or less the same. There's not that many changes in the industry. Of course, the restaurant industry is changing a bit, but the biggest thing that hit us 5 years ago was the pandemic. That reset the restaurant industry. Some survived, some didn't. Some of my clients figured out how to do delivery and takeout, and they did very well. The big thing right now that I'm hearing is the economy because of the politics. So I had two clients earlier this year that said, depending on how the election turns out, we'll know whether we're going to go forward. They both said that. After the election, Roger, one of them said to me, the election turned out great, let's go. And one of the others said, I didn't like those results. I think I'm going to put my project on hold. So
Interesting.
the tariffs are all over the news right now.
For sure.
We're saying this, if you're listening to this 3 years from now, you might be saying, what are you talking about? But today's news is the
The hot
tariffs.
topic, for sure. Where's it going?
Most of this food that the restaurants are selling is local. If you're using exotic fruits and things like that, they may be coming from somewhere else. But many people are telling me some of their paper products are being sourced overseas and they're having to pay a tariff on that. And some people are telling me they're seeing a slowdown because people aren't spending as much. They're waiting to see what happens. We're in a political time right now. So a year from now or a year and a half from now, it'll be interesting to see what we're talking about then, because some people are opening businesses because they think the future's bright. Some people aren't.
It's been fantastic information. And I've read your book, and it's wonderful that you're offering that to our audience. So again, theleasecoach.com, get a copy of Dale's
Just
book.
sign up. And I'll give you a free.
Terrific.
Oh, you got it. Yeah.
Oh, I got
it. See, I got the pretty picture cover version. You got the
this is
version
an
you're
older
holding,
version.
right? The version you're holding is the version that we send out. This is a promotional copy with a picture on it.
I see.
Right? Same content inside, 330 pages. My publisher says most people only read about 50% of a how-to book. So when you get my book, don't read it from front to back. It's all in sections. You can read the deposit section. You can read the personal guarantee section. You can read all the different sections you want without reading it front to back because you might not get there. And we send out hundreds and hundreds of these every year, Roger. And it's so funny how so many people email back, thanks for the book. Don't have time to read it. You're hired. Because they just want, if you can hire the guy that wrote the book, sometimes it's more expedient than trying to learn it for yourself. But
no, I totally see that. Absolutely.
It's a fun industry to work in. Am I going to see you at the California Restaurant Show coming up?
I can't wait. August 3rd through the 5th, and I booked my reservations yesterday. So I'll be flying there, and I'll see you at the show, Dale.
Wonderful. It's Roger.
Thank you so much for being on the show. You're doing a great service to our industry.
You're welcome.
That was the Restaurant Rockstars podcast. Thanks so much to our audience for tuning in. Can't wait to see you in the next episode. Thank you to our sponsors this week. Stay tuned, stay well. See you next time. Running my restaurants taught me that the right tools move your business forward. So I'm a fan of Touch Bistro. It's more than just a POS. It's an all-in-one restaurant management system built by restaurateurs. Touch Bistro helps speed up service, reduce errors, and turn tables faster, while loyalty programs, online ordering, and contactless payments boost your bottom line. Plus, real-time analytics, inventory tracking, and staff scheduling are game changers. Want to learn more? Reach out to my friend Becky at BTARTICK@touchbistro.com or give her a call at 647-360-3994. She'll give you the full scoop and take great care of you.
Thanks for listening to the Restaurant Rockstars podcast. For lots of great resources, head over to restaurantrockstars.com. See you next time.